Some stories find us at the right time. This is a tale about a woman who walked 3 miles in the dust because no one would give her a ride. About a man who looked at her and saw everything except who she really was. About the meal that changed both their lives. I wrote this for those of you who have ever been judged before you could speak. For those who have learned that dignity is not given, it is carried. And for those who believe, as I do, that redemption is not a single moment, but a series of small choices, made day after day, plate after plate. This is not a story about cowboys and gunfights. It is about what happens in the kitchen when the men have gone to bed. About the quiet courage of showing up again after being turned away. If you have ever fed someone who did not deserve your kindness, this story is for you. The dust had not yet settled on her hem when the foreman spoke. She walked from town. Caleb Stone stood on the porch, coffee growing cold in his hand. 3 miles of hard road in this heat. The woman at his gate was catching her breath. One hand pressed against the wooden post, the other clutching a carpet bag with brass clasps that had seen better years. She was large. That was the first thing he noticed. The second thing is the way she straightened her collar before looking up at the house, a small, deliberate gesture, as if preparing herself for battle. Rollins leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "Cookie's been dead a week. Word travels fast." Apparently, the woman began walking toward the house. Her shoes were cracked at the soles. Caleb could see that from here. Good shoes once, worn down to nothing. The kind of shoes that told a story he did not want to hear. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, did not climb them, waited. "Mr. Stone." Her voice was steadier than he expected. No pleading in it, just a question. "That's right. My name is Mercy Holloway. I heard you might be needing a cook." Rollins made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a cough. Caleb ignored him. "Kitchen work requires stamina, ma'am." There it was, the sentence he had prepared. Polite, final. The kind of words that close doors without seeming to. The woman's expression did not change. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded paper, yellowed at the edges, soft from years of handling. "My references, sir. 7 years with Governor Clayton's household. Before that, the Morrison estate in St. Louis." Caleb took the paper. The handwriting was elegant, faded, a woman's hand. "My daughter does not simply cook. She nourishes." He folded it again without reading further. "I'll keep your name on file. Mrs. Holloway." The woman, Mercy, looked at him. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she nodded. "I understand, Mr. Stone." She tucked the letter back into her pocket. "Might I trouble you for a glass of water before I walk back? It's a long road." Something in her voice caught him. Not bitterness, something worse. Familiarity. As if she had stood on porches like this before, asked for water before, been turned away before. "Rollins, get Mrs. Holloway some water." The foreman pushed off from the railing, disappearing into the house. Caleb remained where he was. The woman remained where she was. The silence between them filled with the sound of cicadas and the distant lowing of cattle. "You walked from town," Caleb said. It was not a question. Yes, sir. No one offered you a ride. No, sir. He looked at her shoes again, at the dust coating the hem of her dress, at the sweat darkening the collar of her calico blouse, faded at the elbows from too many washings. Why not? Mercy Holloway met his eyes. I expect you know why. Mr. Stone, he did. He knew exactly why. And he knew that he was doing the same thing, in his own polite way, that every wagon driver in town had done when they saw her waiting by the road. Rollins returned with a tin cup. He handed it to the woman without looking at her. She drank slowly, deliberately, as if savoring each drop. When she finished, she handed the cup back. Thank you kindly. She turned to leave. Mrs. Holloway. She stopped, did not turn around. The road back is rough. If you wait an hour, one of my men can take you in the wagon. Now she turned. Her face was unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. That's kind of you, sir, but I've imposed enough. She walked down the path toward the gate. Her back was straight. Her steps were measured. She did not look back. Caleb watched until she disappeared around the bend in the road, swallowed by the dust and the shimmering heat. Rollins appeared beside him. That's the third one this month. Word's getting out, you need a cook. Word's getting out wrong. Then, she had references. Caleb said nothing. The coffee in his hand had gone cold. He poured it over the railing, watched it darken the dirt below. She did, he said finally. She did have references. He went inside. The kitchen was dark, cold, the stove unlit for the 7th day in a row, dishes piled in the basin, a half-rotten ham sitting in the larder, drawing flies on the table where Rollins had set down the tin cup. A single drop of water caught the light from the window. Caleb stood there for a long time, looking at it. 3 miles back to town, in this heat, in those shoes, he picked up the cup and set it in the basin with the others. Then he walked out to the barn to check on the horses. Some folks say the kitchen is just a room, but those of us who have stood at a stove at 4 in the morning know better. If this story reminds you of someone who fed you when you needed it most, we would love to hear where you are reading from today. The woman had not yet reached the gate when Caleb heard himself call out, Mrs. Holloway? She stopped. Her shoulders rose slightly. A breath held, then fell. She turned, and the afternoon sun caught the dust on her face, the dampness at her temples. Wait! He did not know why he said it. The words came before the thought. Something about those cracked shoes. Something about the way she had drunk the water slowly, like someone who had learned not to waste anything. The kitchen. He gestured toward the house. Show me what you can do. Mercy Holloway stood motionless for a long moment. Then she walked back up the path, past him, through the door he held open, into the dark mouth of the house. The kitchen was worse than he remembered. Grease filmed the stovetop, dishes crusted in the basin. The smell of rot crept from the larder that ham. Still sitting there, still drawing flies. A week of neglect had turned the room into something shameful. Mercy said nothing. She set down her carpet bag, rolled up her sleeves, tied on the stained apron hanging from its hook. Her hands moved. Caleb watched from the doorway as she cleared the stovetop, fed kindling into the firebox, coaxed flame from cold iron. She found the eggs still good and the bacon, wrapped in cloth, in the cool corner of the larder. She worked without speaking, without looking at him, as if he had already left the room. The smell came first, bacon fat crackling, then eggs, their edges going golden in the rendered grease. She found flour, salt, lard, her hands measuring by memory, not by cup. Biscuits took shape under her palms. When she set the plate before him, steam rose from it like a question. Caleb sat, picked up his fork, cut into the eggs. The first bite stopped him. He looked at the plate, at the woman standing by the stove, hands folded, waiting. He took another bite, then another. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than he intended. "Your skill is not in question, Mrs. Holloway." She waited. "But I have guests who visit regularly, important men, and appearances." He set down his fork. "Appearances matter in this business." The woman's face did not change. She untied the apron, folded it with precise, deliberate movements, set it on the table beside the plate. Then she walked out the back door without a word. Caleb sat alone in the kitchen, the food growing cold before him. He picked up his fork again and could not bring himself to take another bite. The plate sat on the table until dark. Caleb did not touch it again. He went out to the barn, checked the horses, walked the fence line until his boots wore through the dew. When he came back, the kitchen smelled of cold grease and something else. Something like accusation. He scraped the food into the slop bucket, washed the plate himself, set it in the rack to dry. The folded apron still lay where she had left it. He did not sleep that night. The house creaked around him, empty in a way it had not been empty before. Cookie had died in his sleep, quiet as a candle going out. The old man had been part of the ranch for 20 years. Caleb had not wept at his passing, had not known how, but now, lying in the dark, he thought about the woman walking back to town in the heat, 3 miles, in those shoes, and he thought about what he had said to her. Appearances matter. The words tasted sour in his mouth. At first light, he saddled his sorrel mare. The road to town was hard-packed from the summer drought, and the mare's hooves raised small clouds of dust that settled on his trousers, his boots, the brim of his hat. He passed the spot where the road curved around the old oak, the halfway point. She would have reached it just as the sun hit its peak. No shade for another mile after that. The town appeared slowly, shimmering in the morning heat. He tied the mare outside the general store and went in. "Morning, Mr. Stone." The shopkeeper looked up from his ledger. Caleb nodded. "Looking for someone. A woman came in on the noon stage yesterday. Large woman, traveling alone." The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose. The cook heard she was making rounds, stopped at the Morrison place, then the Hendrick spread, ended up at Pruitt's boarding house last I heard. She's still there. "Couldn't say. Mrs. Pruitt would know." Caleb touched the brim of his hat and walked out. The boarding house sat at the end of Main Street, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a porch that sagged in the middle. Mrs. Pruitt was sweeping the front steps when he approached. She stopped, leaned on her broom, watched him tie the mare to the hitching post. "Mr. Stone, don't often see you in town. Mrs. Pruitt." He climbed the steps. "I'm looking for a woman who came in yesterday. Name of Holloway." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "You the one who turned her away?" He said nothing. "She paid for one night. Can't afford another." Mrs. Pruitt resumed sweeping. "Room 6, top of the stairs. But if you're here to turn her away again, you can save yourself the climb." Caleb took off his hat, held it in both hands. "I'm not." The stairs groaned under his weight. The hallway smelled of lye soap and old wood. Room 6 was at the end. The door closed, a strip of light visible beneath it. He knocked. Footsteps. A pause. The door opened. Mercy Holloway stood in the frame, her carpetbag open on the narrow bed behind her, a faded dress folded in her hands. Her face showed nothing. Not surprise, not anger, not hope. "Mr. Stone, Mrs. Holloway." Neither of them moved. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. "I was wrong." The words came out rough, unpracticed. He had not rehearsed them, had not known what he would say until he said it. Mercy's expression did not change. "Wrong about what? About you? About what I said?" He turned the hat in his hands, running his thumb along the brim. "About appearances. I'm still the same size I was yesterday. Mr. Stone, I know." He met her eyes. "But I'm different." She studied him. Her gaze was steady, unblinking. The gaze of someone who had learned to read people the way others read books. "Different how?" "I ate that food after you left." He swallowed. "Best meal I've had in years, maybe ever. And I let you walk out because I was afraid of what people might think. And now I'm standing in a boarding house hallway, hat in hand, asking you to come back." Mercy set the dress down on the bed, crossed her arms. "On what terms? Fair wage. Same as Cookie got. What else? Private quarters. The room behind the kitchen. It's small, but it's clean. What else?" Caleb hesitated. "The men will treat you with respect. Any man who doesn't answers to me." Mercy looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned, picked up the dress, and resumed folding it. "Mrs. Pruitt says I owe for tonight if I stay past noon." Caleb reached into his pocket, pulled out a coin, set it on the dresser by the door. "That covers it." Mercy did not look at the coin. She placed the folded dress in her carpet bag, smoothed the fabric, closed the clasps. "I've been turned away from 3 ranches this month. Mr. Stone, same reason every time. Men look at me and see something they don't want at their table. I know. You were the 4th. I know." She picked up the carpet bag, walked to the door, stopped in front of him. "If I come back with you and you change your mind again, I won't have the fare to leave. I'll be stuck in that town with no work and no way out. I won't change my mind." "How do I know that?" Caleb looked at her, at the dust still clinging to her collar, at the lines around her eyes, carved by years of heat and work and waiting, at the hands that had made the best meal he had ever tasted. "You don't," he said. "But I'm asking anyway." Mercy Holloway held his gaze for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5. Then she walked past him, down the stairs, Out into the morning light, he followed. The mare stood waiting at the hitching post. Caleb helped Mercy onto the wagon he had borrowed from the livery. He had not thought to bring it, but somewhere between the general store and the boarding house. He had made arrangements he did not remember making. They rode in silence for the first mile. Then Mercy spoke. "The men at your ranch, how many? 12. Plus the foreman. They know you're hiring me." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. Not yet. The darkness was still thick when Mercy opened her eyes. 4 o'clock. She knew it without looking at a clock. Her body had learned the rhythm of kitchens years ago. Back when she was 12, and her mother first put a wooden spoon in her hand. Rise before the sun. Light the fire before the cold settles into your bones. Have the coffee ready before the first boot hits the floor. The room behind the kitchen was small, as Caleb had promised. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window that looked out onto the back pasture. She had slept in worse. She had slept in better. It did not matter. What mattered was the kitchen waiting on the other side of the door. She dressed in the dark, the same calico dress, washed and hung to dry the night before. The same cracked shoes. She had no others. Her mother's apron, the one she carried in her carpet bag. The one with the embroidered violets along the hem, she tied around her waist with hands that did not tremble. Not yet. The kitchen was cold. The stove sat like a dead thing in the corner, its iron belly empty. Mercy knelt before it, opened the firebox, laid kindling in a careful lattice. The match flared. The flame caught. She fed it slowly, patiently, the way her mother had taught her, small sticks first, then larger, then the split logs that would burn hot and steady through the morning. The stove began to tick as the metal expanded. A familiar sound. A good sound. She found the larder better stocked than before. Someone Caleb, she assumed, had cleared out the rotten ham and brought in fresh supplies. Bacon wrapped in cloth, eggs in a wire basket, flour in a tin canister, salt, lard, a small crock of butter. Mercy worked. The bacon went into the largest skillet first. Strips laid side by side, fat beginning to render in the growing heat. The smell rose salt and smoke, and something deeper, something that spoke of mornings and labor and the simple act of feeding hungry people. She cracked eggs into a bowl, 14 of them, 2 for each man, whisked with a fork until the yolks broke and blended. The batter for flapjacks came together under her hands. Flour, salt, a pinch of sugar, buttermilk from the crock in the cool corner of the larder. She did not measure. She never measured. Her hands knew. The coffee pot went on the back of the stove, grounds measured by the fistful, water from the pump outside, strong enough to stand a spoon in. That was how ranch hands liked it. That was how her father had liked it, back before the fever took him. The sky outside the window began to lighten. Gray first, then pink, then the pale gold of early morning. Mercy moved through the kitchen like water through a creek bed, around obstacles, over rough spots, always forward, always flowing. The flapjacks piled on a platter, the bacon drained on brown paper, the eggs waited in the bowl, ready for the skillet As soon as she heard the boots, she heard them at 6 when heavy footsteps on the porch, the creak of the dining hall door, voices low, rough, the voices of men who had been awake for an hour already, who had fed horses and checked fences and were now expecting food in their bellies before the real work began. Mercy poured the eggs into the hot skillet. They sizzled, edges going white, and she worked them with a wooden spatula, folding, turning, keeping them soft. The dining hall fell quiet. She could not see them from where she stood, but she could feel them. 12 men, 12 pairs of eyes. She had cooked for larger crowds. The governor's dinners had sometimes seated 40, but she had never cooked for men who did not want her there. She plated the eggs, arranged the bacon, stacked the flapjacks, carried everything to the serving window that opened between the kitchen and the dining hall, and looked through. They sat along the long plank table, benches on either side. Caleb was at the head, his face unreadable. Rollins sat to his right, arms crossed, plate untouched. The others, young men, old men, weathered faces, calloused hands, stared at the food and did not move. Mercy set the platters on the window ledge. "Breakfast is ready." No one moved. Rollins leaned back on the bench. His eyes traveled from the food to Mercy and back again. His lip curled. "I don't eat food made by—" He stopped. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Every eye in the room turned to Caleb. The rancher sat motionless for a long moment. Then he reached forward, picked up his fork, and cut into the eggs on his plate. He lifted the bite to his mouth, chewed, swallowed. He did not speak. He did not need to. Rollins' face darkened, but he said nothing more. One by one, the other men picked up their forks. The young one at the end of the table, barely 20, with a thin beard and nervous eyes, was the first after Caleb. Then an older man with gray in his hair and deep lines around his mouth. Then the others, slowly, reluctantly, like cattle being driven through an unfamiliar gate. The sounds of eating filled the room. Forks on tin plates, the scrape of knives, the pour of coffee from the pot Mercy had set on the table. Rollins did not touch his food. Mercy returned to the kitchen. Her hands found the basin, the soap, the stack of pots waiting to be washed. She scrubbed. The water was hot enough to redden her skin, but she did not slow down. She scrubbed until the grease was gone, until the iron gleamed, until every surface was clean enough to see her reflection in. The dining hall emptied, boots on the porch, voices fading toward the barn. She was alone. Her hands began to shake. She gripped the edge of the basin and held on. The trembling moved up her arms, into her shoulders, down into her chest. She had not eaten. She had not slept more than a few hours. She had walked 3 miles in the heat and been turned away and walked back and been hired and spent her first night in a strange room listening to the sounds of a strange house settling around her. And now this. The shaking lasted only a moment. She forced it down, the way she always did, the way her mother had taught her. Breathe. Count to 10. Breathe again. She was wiping down the stovetop when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. The young man from the end of the table stood in the kitchen doorway. He held his hat in his hands, turning it by the brim, not quite meeting her eyes. "Ma'am, yes, I just wanted to say." He swallowed. That was good, real good, better than cookie ever made. Mercy studied him. Young, nervous, sincere. Thank you. My name's Emmett. I know. You don't eat onions. His eyes widened. How'd you know that? I saw you push them aside yesterday. At supper. She had not been there, but she had seen the plates when she cleared them. She always noticed. Today I left them out. Emmett stared at her. Then a small smile crossed his face, the first genuine smile she had seen since arriving at the ranch. Thank you. Ma'am. He put his hat back on and walked out. Mercy stood in the empty kitchen, listening to his footsteps fade. The morning light streamed through the window, catching the dust motes floating in the air. The stove ticked as it cooled. One ally. It was a start. She picked up the dish rag and returned to work. But as she wiped down the counter, her eyes drifted to the window to the barn, where the men were saddling horses for the day's work. Rollins stood apart from the others, speaking to two men she did not recognize. His gestures were sharp, angry. The men nodded. Then all three of them turned and looked toward the kitchen. 2 weeks passed like water over stones. Mercy learned the rhythms of the ranch the way she had learned every kitchen before it, through repetition, through observation, through the slow accumulation of small details that added up to understanding. She learned that Emmett could not stomach onions, but loved garlic. That old Hector, the gray-haired man who sat at the far end of the table, needed his meat cut small 'cause his teeth were going bad. That the hand called Sullivan took his coffee with 3 sugars, though he would never admit it in front of the others. That Rollins ate everything she put in front of him now, though he never looked at her, never spoke to her, never acknowledged her existence except through the empty plates he left behind. She learned the sounds of the house, the creak of the third step on the back porch, the rattle of the window in the pantry when the wind came from the west, the particular groan of the floorboards outside Caleb's study. She learned which burners on the stove ran hot and which ran cool. She learned where the mice had chewed through the corner of the flour bin and patched it with a piece of tin she found in the barn. She learned, and she cooked, and she waited. The first sign came on the 9th day. She found it outside her door in the morning, a shirt, folded neatly, with a tear along the seam of the left sleeve. No note, no explanation, just the shirt, waiting. Mercy picked it up, turned it over in her hands. The fabric was worn soft from years of washing, the collar frayed at the edges, a working man's shirt. Someone had left it for her to mend. She found needle and thread in her mother's sewing kit, the one she carried everywhere, the one with the carved wooden case her father had made before the fever took him. She sat by the window in the evening light and stitched the seam closed, her fingers moving in the same patterns her mother had taught her 30 years ago. The next morning, she left the mended shirt outside her door. By afternoon, it was gone. 2 days later, another shirt appeared. Then a pair of trousers with a torn pocket. Then a sock with a hole in the heel. Mercy mended them all, asking no questions, expecting no thanks. It was enough to know that someone she did not know, who had decided she was worth trusting with small things. The second sign came on Sunday. She had been planning it all week. The apples had come in from town on Thursday, a bushel of them, small and slightly bruised, but still firm enough for baking. She had set them aside in the cool corner of the larder, turning them each day to check for rot, waiting for the right moment. Sunday was the right moment. She started early, before the light. The crust came first: flour, salt, lard cut in with a fork until the mixture resembled coarse sand. Cold water, just enough to bring it together. Her mother had always said the secret to a good crust was cold hands and a warm heart. Mercy's hands were cold enough. She was not sure about the rest. The apples she peeled in long spirals, the skin coming off in ribbons that curled on the counter. She sliced them thin, tossed them with sugar and cinnamon from the tin with the faded label. Added a squeeze of lemon juice to keep them from browning. The filling went into the crust. The top crust went on, edges crimped with her fingertips. 3 slits cut in the center to let the steam escape. The pie went into the oven, and Mercy waited. The smell filled the kitchen first, then crept through the rest of the house: butter and sugar and cinnamon, the warm sweetness of baked apples, the particular fragrance of a crust turning golden. By the time she pulled the pie from the oven, her hands wrapped in a flour sack towel, she could hear the men gathering in the dining hall. She cut the pie into 12 slices, set them on plates, carried them to the serving window one at a time. The dining hall fell quiet when the first plate appeared. Old Hector was the one who spoke. "That smells like—" He stopped. His weathered face had gone strange, not angry, not sad, but something in between. "That smells like something." Mercy set a plate in front of him. The old man looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked up his fork, cut a small piece from the corner, and lifted it to his mouth. He chewed slowly. His eyes closed. When they opened, they were wet. "My wife made one just like this." His voice was rough, catching on the words. 30 years gone. Fever took her. I never... He stopped, swallowed, tried again. "I never thought I'd taste it again." The room was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Old Hector looked at Mercy. The tears were running down his face now, catching in the deep lines around his mouth. But he made no move to wipe them away. "Thank you, ma'am." His voice broke. "Thank you." Mercy nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. She returned to the kitchen and stood at the basin, her hands gripping the edge, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She had not expected that. She had not expected any of it. Not the shirts left at her door. Not the quiet gratitude of men who could not say what they felt. Not the old man weeping over a slice of pie. She had expected only to cook, to feed, to survive. She had not expected to belong. The evening came slowly, the light fading from gold to orange to the deep blue of early night. Mercy finished her work, banked the fire in the stove, wiped down the counters until they gleamed. The house settled around her. The sounds of men retiring to the bunkhouse, the distant whinny of horses in the barn. She stepped out onto the back porch. The stars were coming out, one by one, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. She sat on the top step, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and watched them appear. Footsteps behind her. She did not turn. She knew who it was by the weight of the tread, the particular rhythm of boot on wood. Caleb sat down on the step beside her. Not too close, not too far. The distance of employer and employee, or perhaps something else entirely. That was a good thing you did today. I made a pie. You made Hector cry. That man hasn't cried since his wife died. Mercy said nothing. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The stars continued to emerge, filling the sky with their cold, distant light. My wife never cooked, he said finally. 18 years we were married. She never once stepped into a kitchen except to give instructions to the help. What did she do? Read books, played piano. She was beautiful. He paused. She died 3 years ago. Consumption. I sat with her at the end, held her hand while she went. Mercy pulled her shawl tighter. You miss her every day, but I don't miss the smell of her cooking because there wasn't any. I never knew what I was missing until... He stopped. Did not finish the sentence. The silence stretched between them. My mother was a cook, Mercy said. Best one I ever knew. She could make a feast out of scraps and water. She taught me everything, how to season, how to time, how to feed 100 people and make each one feel like they were the only person in the room. Where is she now? Buried outside of St. Louis. 4 years ago, I dug the grave myself. Caleb turned to look at her. His face was shadowed, unreadable in the fading light. You dug it yourself. No one else was going to do it. He was quiet for a long time. The stars wheeled overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The men are warming to you, Caleb said. Even the ones who didn't want to. Not all of them. No, not all of them. Mercy looked at him. His profile was sharp against the darkening sky. The line of his jaw, the slope of his shoulders. And Rollins watches me, she said, every day. He watches and he waits. Caleb nodded slowly. I know. What is he waiting for? Caleb did not answer. He stood, brushed the dust from his trousers, and looked down at her. Get some sleep, Mrs. Holloway. Tomorrow is another day. He walked into the house. Mercy sat on the porch, watching the stars, listening to the coyotes, feeling the weight of something unseen pressing down on her shoulders. In the darkness beyond the barn, a match flared and died. Someone was watching. The morning began like any other. Mercy rose at 4, lit the stove, set the coffee to boil. The routine had become familiar, now the creak of the floorboards under her feet, the hiss of the kindling catching flame, the slow warming of the kitchen as the fire took hold. She moved through the darkness with the ease of long practice, her hands finding what they needed without her eyes to guide them. The bacon was sizzling in the pan when she heard the shouting. It came from the main house, Caleb's voice, sharp and loud, followed by the lower rumble of Rollins answering. Mercy set down her spatula, wiped her hands on her apron, walked to the window that looked out toward the front porch. Men were gathering. She could see them emerging from the bunkhouse, pulling on hats, buckling belts, drawn by the commotion like moss to a lantern flame. Something was wrong. The back door of the kitchen banged open. Rollins stood in the doorway. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with something that looked like triumph. Behind him, two of the younger hands, the ones Mercy had seen him talking to that first morning, crowded in. "You," Rollins said. "Come with me." Mercy did not move. Now? She untied her apron, folded it, set it on the counter beside the stove. Then she followed Rollins through the house, through the hallway, into the dining room where the rest of the men had gathered. Caleb stood at the head of the table. His face was pale, his jaw tight. On the table in front of him sat a small wooden box with a brass lock, the cash box from his study. The lid was open. The inside was empty. $40, Caleb said. His voice was flat, controlled. "Missing since last night." The men shifted, murmured, looked at each other. Mercy stood in the doorway, Rollins at her back, the two young hands flanking her like guards. "I found something." Rollins pushed past her into the room. He was carrying her carpet bag, the one with the brass clasps, the one she kept under her bed. "Found this in her room, under the mattress." He upended the bag onto the table. Her spare dress tumbled out, her mother's sewing kit, a comb with 3 broken teeth, a small leather Bible with her mother's name written inside the cover, and 4 $10 bills, folded in half, landing on the wood with a sound like falling leaves. The room went silent. Mercy looked at the money, at her belongings scattered across the table like evidence of a crime, at the faces of the men she had been feeding for 2 weeks, some shocked, some suspicious, some carefully blank. She looked at Caleb. He was staring at the bills. His hands were flat on the table, his knuckles white. "I told you," Rollins' voice was loud in the silence. "I told you from the start. You can't trust someone like her. Comes in here, cooks a few meals, makes everyone think she's some kind of saint. And all the while she's waiting for her chance." Mercy said nothing. "Well," Rollins turned to her, "what do you have to say for yourself?" She met his eyes, held them, did not speak. "Nothing? Of course, nothing. What can you say? The money was in your bag, under your mattress, caught red-handed." One of the younger hands, not Emmett, thank God. Not Emmett, spoke up. "I always said we couldn't trust—" "Quiet!" Caleb's voice cut through the room like a blade. The young hand fell silent. The rancher had not moved. He stood at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on the bills lying among Mercy's scattered possessions. His face was unreadable. "Everyone out!" Rollins stepped forward. "Mr. Stone, the evidence is right here. She stole from you, from all of us. We need to—" "I said out." The men filed out slowly, reluctantly, casting glances over their shoulders as they went. Rollins was the last to leave. He paused at the door, looked at Mercy, then at Caleb. "9 years I've worked for you," he said. 9 years. And you're going to take her word over mine. "I haven't taken anyone's word yet." Caleb's voice was quiet. "Now, get out." The door closed. Mercy stood alone with Caleb in the silent room, The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes floating in the air, illuminating the scattered contents of her life spread across the table. Caleb picked up one of the bills, turned it over in his hands, held it up to the light. "This money is old," he said. Mercy waited. "I went to the bank last week, drew out fresh bills to pay the hands at the end of the month. New bills? Crisp?" He set the bill down, picked up another. "These are worn, soft. They've been in circulation for years." He looked at her. "And they're folded in half." Mercy did not understand. She remained silent. "I fold my money in thirds. Always have. My father taught me a bill folded in thirds fits better in a wallet. Doesn't crease as bad. Anyone who's worked for me more than a month knows that." He set the second bill down. "Rollins has worked for me 9 years. The words hung in the air. Caleb walked around the table, stopped in front of Mercy. His eyes searched her face for what? She did not know. Guilt? Perhaps. Fear? Some sign that would tell him what to believe. She gave him nothing. She had learned long ago that words meant little when the verdict had already been decided. She would not beg. She would not plead. She would stand here and wait for him to choose. "You didn't take this money." It was not a question. "No, sir." "You know who did." "I have my suspicions." Caleb nodded slowly. He gathered the bills from the table, folded them in thirds, and slipped them into his pocket. Then he walked to the door and opened it. The men were gathered on the porch, waiting. Rollins stood at the front, arms crossed, face expectant. "Rollins!" The foreman stepped forward. "Mr. Stone, 9 years you've worked for me. Long enough to know how I fold my money." Rollins' face changed. The triumph drained out of it, replaced by something else: calculation. Then fear. Then a desperate blankness. "Long enough to know I went to the bank last week for fresh bills." "These aren't fresh." Caleb pulled the money from his pocket, held it up. "These are old, worn, and folded wrong. Mr. Stone, I don't know what you planted this money in her room. You waited until you could make it look convincing, and then you planted it." Rollins's jaw tightened. "You're going to believe her over me. Some woman who walked in off the road 3 weeks ago. I'm going to believe the evidence." Caleb's voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it now, something cold and hard and final. "Get your things. Be off my property by noon." "Caleb, that's Mr. Stone to you, and you've got 4 hours." Rollins stood frozen. His eyes darted from Caleb to Mercy to the gathered men, looking for an ally, finding none. Even the 2 young hands who had flanked her in the kitchen had stepped back, distancing themselves. "Anyone else want to go with him?" Caleb looked at the assembled men. "Anyone else have a problem with Mrs. Holloway cooking your meals?" Silence. "Good. Get back to work." The men dispersed. Rollins remained on the porch, his hands clenched at his sides, his face dark with fury. "You'll regret this," he said. "You'll regret choosing her over me." Caleb said nothing. He turned his back on the foreman and walked into the house. Mercy was still standing by the table, her possessions scattered around her. She looked up when Caleb entered. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. I should have seen it coming." He began gathering her things, placing them carefully back in the carpet bag. The spare dress, the sewing kit, The Bible. Rollins has been with me since my father died. I trusted him. Trust isn't always earned by time. Caleb paused, looked at her. No, he said. I suppose it isn't. He handed her the carpet bag. Their fingers brushed just for a moment, just the briefest contact, and then he stepped back. Breakfast is burning. Mercy smelled it, then the bacon. Still in the pan, smoking on the stove. She hurried to the kitchen, pulled the pan off the heat, scraped the charred strips into the slop bucket. Through the window, she could see Rollins walking toward the bunkhouse, his shoulders rigid, his stride angry, and behind him, watching from the shadow of the barn, 3 men stood together. They did not follow Rollins to help him pack. They watched Mercy. 3 men left with Rollins. They packed their gear in silence, loaded their horses, and rode out without looking back. Mercy watched them go from the kitchen window, 4 figures growing smaller against the late afternoon sun, disappearing into the dust cloud that swallowed the road to town. The ranch felt different after that. Emptier. The men who remained worked longer hours, covering the gaps left by those who had gone. Conversations in the dining hall grew shorter, more strained. The easy rhythm of the place had been broken, and no one knew quite how to put it back together. Mercy cooked. It was all she could do. She rose earlier, worked later, made larger portions to fuel men who were doing the work of 12 with only 8 pairs of hands. She mended clothes that no one left at her door anymore. She scrubbed floors that did not need scrubbing. She filled the empty hours with labor because the alternative was to think. And thinking led to places she did not want to go. On the 4th night after Rollins left, Caleb did not come to supper. Mercy set his plate at the head of the table, as always. The men ate in silence, casting glances at the empty chair, but no one spoke. When the meal was over and the dishes cleared, the plate remained untouched food, going cold, gravy congealing, the biscuits hardening at the edges. She wrapped the plate in a cloth and went looking for him. He was not in his study, not on the porch, not in the paddock where he sometimes stood in the evenings, watching the horses settle for the night. She found him in the barn. The door was open a crack, and a thin line of lantern light cut across the dirt floor. Mercy pushed it wider, stepped inside, let her eyes adjust to the dimness. Caleb sat on a hay bale in the far corner, near the stalls where the draft horses shifted and stamped. His head was in his hands. His shoulders were hunched forward, curved like a man carrying a weight too heavy to bear. He did not look up when she entered. Mercy crossed the barn slowly. The smell of hay and horse sweat and old leather filled her nostrils. Her shoes scraped against the packed dirt floor. And still he did not move. She set the plate on the hay bale beside him. The cloth fell away, revealing the food cold now, unappetizing, but still food. Then she sat on the bale opposite him and waited. The silence stretched. A horse nickered softly in its stall. Somewhere outside, an owl called, and another answered. The lantern flame flickered, casting long shadows across the weathered boards of the barn walls. Caleb's hands dropped from his face. He looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, bloodshot. His cheeks were wet. Mercy had seen men cry before at funerals, at bedsides, at the ends of long roads that led nowhere, but she had never seen this particular expression. It was not grief. It was not anger. It was shame. My father built this ranch. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw. 50 head of cattle when he started. Just him and my mother in a one-room cabin with a dirt floor. He worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 20 years. When he died, we had 300 head and 12 men on the payroll. Mercy said nothing. I was 22 when I took over. Scared to death. Didn't know what I was doing. Made every mistake you can make, and some you can't imagine. He laughed a short, bitter sound that had no humor in it. But I didn't lose anything. That's what I told myself. 30 years, and I never lost a single head to mismanagement. Never let a man go for anything but cause. He looked at the plate beside him, at the cold food, the congealed gravy, the hardening biscuits. 4 men. I lost 4 men because I chose to keep a cook. You lost 4 men because you chose to do what was right. Is there a difference? Mercy considered the question. The lantern flame sputtered, throwing shadows across Caleb's face. Yes, she said finally. There is. Caleb shook his head. He stood suddenly, violently, knocking the hay bale back. The plate slid off, hit the ground, scattered food across the dirt. Right. He spat the word like a curse. Right. What does right matter when there's work that needs doing and not enough hands to do it? What does right matter when the cattle aren't getting fed and the fences aren't getting mended and the men who stayed are working themselves into the ground? He paced the length of the barn, his boots kicking up dust, his hands clenched at his sides. Rollins was a liar and a thief. I know that. I saw it. But he knew this ranch. He knew the land, the cattle, the rhythms of the work. He could do the job of 3 men when he wanted to. Caleb stopped, turned. His face was twisted with something that looked like self-loathing. And I threw him out for planting $40 in your room. Mercy bent down, picked up the plate from the dirt, brushed off the food that was still salvageable, half a biscuit, a slice of ham, and set it back on the hay bale. You threw him out for lying, she said, for trying to destroy someone who had done nothing wrong. For you, the words hung in the air. I threw him out for you. And now my ranch is falling apart because I couldn't stomach seeing an innocent woman blamed for something she didn't do. Mercy stood. Her back straightened. Her chin lifted. Then maybe you should have let him win. Caleb stared at her. Maybe you should have looked at that money and believed him. Sent me packing. Kept your foreman and your 4 good men and your precious ranch that your father built with his bare hands. Her voice was steady. But there was something underneath it now, something hot and sharp and dangerous. Would that have been easier? Would you be sitting in your dining room right now, eating a hot supper, sleeping in a clean bed, not wondering if you made the right choice? Yes. The word was barely a whisper. Yes, it would have been easier. Mercy nodded. She picked up the plate again, the dirty plate, with its scattered food and its coating of barn dust, and thrust it toward him. Then, eat this. Eat it off the floor like a dog, because that's what you'd be if you'd made that choice. An animal who does what's easy instead of what's right. Caleb did not take the plate. My mother used to say something. Mercy's voice was quieter now. The anger banked, but not extinguished. She used to say that a kitchen isn't a room. It's a promise. Every meal you make is a promise to the people who eat it. A promise that someone cares whether they live or die. She set the plate on the hay bale. You made me a promise when you came to that boarding house. You said you wouldn't change your mind. You said I could trust you. And I kept that promise. Yes, you did. And it cost you. She sat down on the opposite bale again, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes steady on his face. That's what promises cost. Mr. Stone, if they were easy to keep, they wouldn't mean anything. The barn was silent. The horses had gone still in their stalls, as if listening. Caleb looked at the plate, at the food he had not eaten, at the woman who had brought it to him in the dark. My father never would have made that choice, he said. He would have kept Rollins, sent you away, told himself it was business. Maybe. He was a practical man. Maybe he was. Mercy leaned forward. But you're not your father. And this isn't his ranch anymore. It's yours. Caleb sat down heavily on the hay bale. His shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of him, leaving behind something hollow and exhausted. I don't know if I can save it, he said. The ranch. I don't know if there's a way back from this. Mercy reached over, picked up the biscuit, the clean half, the part that hadn't touched the ground, held it out to him. Eat, she said, and in the morning, we'll find out. He took the biscuit, looked at it, took a bite. Mercy sat with him while he chewed. The lantern burned lower, the flame guttering, the shadows growing longer. Outside, the owl called again, closer now. When the biscuit was gone, Caleb looked at her. Why did you come out here? Because you didn't eat your supper. That's not what I mean. Mercy was quiet for a moment. The lantern sputtered, nearly went out, then caught again. Because no one came for me, she said. When my mother died, when I buried her alone in the rain, when I stood at her grave and realized that not a single person in the world cared whether I lived or died. She met his eyes. I swore I would never let anyone feel that way if I could help it. Caleb said nothing. The barn door creaked. Both of them turned. Emmett stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his face pale in the lantern light. Mr. Stone, you need to come quick. His voice was shaking. Someone cut the fence on the north pasture. The cattle are out. The fence had been cut clean. Mercy saw it the next morning when she brought coffee out to the men who had spent the night rounding up cattle. 3 posts down, wire snipped in 4 places, the cuts too precise to be anything but deliberate. Rollins's work, or the work of men he had left behind. It did not matter. What mattered was the cattle scattered across the north pasture and the exhausted men who had spent the hours before dawn gathering them back. Caleb stood at the break in the fence, his face gray with fatigue, his clothes soaked with sweat and dew. He took the coffee she offered without speaking, drank it in 3 long swallows, handed the cup back. We got most of them, he said. Lost maybe a dozen to the hills. We'll find them when the sun comes up. How many men do you have left? 8. Counting Emmett. He looked at her. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles. 8 men to do the work of 16? Mercy said nothing. There was nothing to say. The days that followed were brutal. The men worked from before dawn until after dark, mending fences, herding cattle, doing the thousand small tasks that kept a ranch alive. Mercy cooked 4 meals a day instead of 3, breakfast before first light, a second meal at mid-morning for the men who could not stop for a proper lunch, supper at dusk, and a late plate for whoever was still working when the stars came out. She did not complain, neither did the men. They ate what she put in front of them, slept when they could, rose again to do it all over. The rhythm of survival had replaced the rhythm of prosperity, and everyone felt the difference. On the 7th day, a rider appeared on the road. Mercy was kneading bread when she saw him through the kitchen window, a figure on horseback, moving slowly toward the ranch, the dust cloud behind him catching the morning light. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the back porch to watch. The rider was not alone. Behind him came another horse, and another, and another, a line of them, stretching back along the road. Too many to count at this distance. Caleb emerged from the barn. He stood in the yard, shading his eyes against the sun, watching the procession approach. The first rider reached the gate and stopped. He was an older man, weathered and gray, with a face Mercy did not recognize. He touched the brim of his hat. Stone. Morrison. Caleb's voice was neutral, cautious. Long way from your spread. Heard you had some trouble. News travels fast. It does. Morrison shifted in his saddle. Behind him, the other riders had reached the gate, a dozen men, maybe more, with horses and gear and the look of people who had come prepared to work. Heard you lost some hands. Heard someone cut your fence. Caleb said nothing. Also heard you've got a new cook. Morrison's eyes found Mercy on the porch. His gaze traveled over her, measuring, assessing, and she felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the old reflex of bracing for rejection. Big woman, walked 3 miles from town because no one would give her a ride. Still, Caleb said nothing. Morrison dismounted. His boots hit the ground with a solid thump. He walked toward the porch, his stride slow and deliberate, until he stood at the bottom of the steps looking up at Mercy. Ma'am, Mr. Morrison, I passed you on the road that day. You were walking. I had an empty seat in my wagon. He took off his hat, held it in both hands. I didn't stop. Mercy waited. I've been thinking about that. Morrison turned the hat by the brim, the same nervous gesture she had seen in Emmett that first morning. Been thinking about it a lot, actually. Couldn't figure out why it bothered me so much. Then I heard about what happened here, the foreman, the money, the men who left, and I understood. Understood what? That I was a coward. He said the words simply, without drama, the way a man might say, the sky is blue, or water is wet. I saw you on that road, and I knew you were looking for work, and I knew you'd be good at it because everyone in the county knew about the Holloway woman who cooked for Governor Clayton. But I didn't stop because I was afraid of what people would think. The words hung in the air. Mercy felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something close to it. Why are you here now? Morrison looked back at the line of riders waiting at the gate. Because I'm done being afraid. Because Stone did what I should have done. And it cost him half his men, and nearly cost him his ranch. And because he stopped, swallowed, started again, because my wife died 6 years ago, and she would have been ashamed of me for what I did that day. He turned to Caleb. I brought 12 men. They'll work for a week, no charge. It's the least I can do. Caleb stared at him, at the men waiting at the gate, at Mercy, standing on the porch with flour on her hands and disbelief on her face. Why? Because some debts can't be paid with money. Morrison put his hat back on. Now, are you going to put us to work? Or are we going to stand here jawing until the sun goes down? The men came through the gate. They came from ranches across the valley, the Morrison spread, the Hendricks place, the small homesteads scattered along the creek. They came with horses and tools and the willingness to work. And they stayed for a week, and then another week, and then Morrison suggested they have a gathering to celebrate the fences being mended and the cattle being found. A social, he called it, the whole valley, potluck supper. Your cook can show us what she's made of. Caleb looked at Mercy. Mercy looked back. I'll need more supplies, she said. Make a list. The day of the social dawned clear and bright. Mercy rose at 3 a.m. and did not stop moving until the sun began to sink toward the western hills. She roasted 2 sides of beef, basted with garlic and herbs she had gathered from the wild places behind the barn. She made biscuits, 200 of them, golden and flaky. Each one turned out by hand. She baked 3 apple pies and 2 peach cobblers and a chocolate cake that used up every egg in the larder. The tables stretched from the porch into the yard. Planks laid across sawhorses, covered with checkered cloths that the women from neighboring ranches had brought. The sun set behind the mountains, and the lanterns came out, and the people came with them, 30 of them, maybe more, filling the chairs and the benches, and the spaces in between. Mercy served them. She moved among the tables with platters and pitchers, refilling plates, pouring coffee, answering questions from people who had come to see for themselves whether the stories were true. The woman who had walked 3 miles in the dust. The woman who had been accused and vindicated. The woman who had stayed when everyone expected her to leave. The meal wound down slowly, the way good meals do. The plates emptied. The conversation softened. The children who had come with their parents began to drift toward sleep, curled on blankets beneath the tables. Old Hector pushed back his chair. The scrape of wood on the ground silenced the crowd. Everyone turned to watch as the old man rose to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him, his hand gripping the edge of the table for support. I want to say something. His voice was rough, uncertain. Mercy saw his hand tremble as he reached for his cup of water, lifted it, held it before him like an offering. I've eaten at tables from here to Kansas, 30 years on the trail, cattle drives and ranch houses and saloons where the food tasted like boot leather. A few people laughed. Hector did not smile. In all that time, I never once ate a meal that made me feel like someone cared whether I lived or died. He turned to look at Mercy. Until now. The yard was silent. The lantern flames flickered in the evening breeze. Somewhere beyond the barn, a horse stamped and nickered. This woman came to us with nothing but a carpet bag and a letter from her dead mother. She walked 3 miles in the heat because not a single one of us would give her a ride. And when she got here, We turned her away, looked at her, and saw something we didn't want at our table. His voice cracked. He steadied himself against the table. But she came back. She cooked for us. She fed us when we didn't deserve to be fed. And when someone tried to destroy her, she didn't run. She stood her ground. She let her work speak for her. He raised his cup. To Mercy Holloway, who feeds more than bellies. The cups rose around the table. 30 voices repeated her name. The sound washed over Mercy like water, like sunlight, like something she had not felt in a very long time. Morrison stood up from his place at the far end of the table. Mrs. Holloway, I'd like to offer you a position at my ranch. Triple what Stone is paying you. Before Mercy could respond, another man rose. I'll match that offer. Then another. I'll beat it. The voices overlapped, competing, until Caleb raised his hand. Gentlemen, his voice cut through the noise. I believe Mrs. Holloway can speak for herself. Mercy looked at the faces around her, at the men who had passed her on the road, at the women who had brought their checkered tablecloths, at Emmett, grinning at her from the far end of the table, at old Hector, still standing, still trembling, still holding his cup aloft, at Caleb, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Thank you for the offers, she said, but I'm not for sale. Morrison leaned forward. Then what are you? Mercy picked up her serving platter, looked at the faces surrounding her. Home, she said. I'm home. The autumn came slowly, the way it always did in this country. The leaves on the cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, then copper, then the deep rust of dried blood. The air grew crisp in the mornings, carrying the smell of wood smoke and the promise of frost. The cattle grew thick winter coats, and the horses stamped and snorted in the cold, their breath rising in white plumes. 3 months had passed since the social. The ranch had found its rhythm again, different from before, but steady. New hands had come to replace those who left. Good men recommended by Morrison and the other ranchers who had helped rebuild the fences. The work got done. The cattle were fed. The books balanced at the end of each month. And Mercy cooked. She had settled into the kitchen the way water settles into a creek bed, finding its natural course, wearing smooth the rough edges of the days. The men no longer fell silent when she entered the dining hall. They greeted her by name, asked after her health, brought her small gifts from town, a tin of cinnamon, a bolt of fabric for a new apron, a book of recipes someone had found in a shop window. She mended their clothes without being asked. They fixed the loose board on her porch without being told. It was not family. Not exactly. But it was something close enough to taste. On a morning in late October, Mercy found Caleb in his study. The door was open, and she could see him sitting at his desk, a piece of paper in his hands. The light from the window fell across his face, catching the gray at his temples, the lines around his eyes that had deepened over the past months. She knocked on the doorframe. He looked up. His expression was strange, not sad, not happy, but something in between. He held up the paper. I found this in my desk. I never read it, not properly, Mercy recognized the yellowed edges, the faded ink, her mother's letter. "I gave that to you the first day," she said. "When you turned me away—" "I know." Caleb set the letter on the desk. His fingers traced the creased folds. I glanced at it, saw the handwriting, put it away, and forgot about it. And now I read it. He picked up the letter again, cleared his throat. "My daughter does not simply cook. She nourishes, she feeds the body, and something deeper, something that has no name but that every hungry soul recognizes. Whoever hires her will receive a blessing they cannot yet understand." The words hung in the air. Mercy felt her throat tighten. "Your mother knew you," Caleb said quietly. "She knew exactly who you were. She knew who she wanted me to be. Is there a difference?" Mercy did not answer. She looked at the letter in his hands, the last thing her mother had written. The final gift before the fever took her. "I should have read this," Caleb said. "That first day. I should have read it and understood what I was being offered. You weren't ready." "No." He set the letter down, looked at her. "I wasn't." The silence stretched between them. Outside, a hawk cried, circling high above the pastures. The sound of hammering drifted from the barn, where Emmett was repairing a stall door. "May I have it back?" Mercy asked. The letter. Caleb picked it up, held it out to her. Their fingers touched as she took it, just for a moment. Just the briefest contact, but neither of them pulled away. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For reading it." Finally, she turned to leave. His voice stopped her at the door. "Mercy." It was the first time he had used her given name. She turned back. "Do you ever regret coming back after I turned you away?" She considered the question. The letter was warm in her hands, worn soft from years of carrying. "No." "Why not?" "Because you were the first person who came after me." She met his eyes. "Not to apologize, not to make yourself feel better, but to change. That matters." Caleb nodded slowly. He rose from his desk, crossed the room, stopped in front of her. "After everything that's happened," he said, "I think you've earned the right to call me by my name. Caleb." The word felt strange on her tongue. Intimate. Real. Mercy. He smiled a small smile, barely there, but genuine. She felt something shift in her chest, something that had been locked away for a very long time. "I should start breakfast," she said. "I'll be in shortly." She walked to the kitchen. The morning light was just beginning to spill through the windows, turning the room gold. The stove was already warm. She had banked the fire the night before, and the coals had held through the darkness. She added kindling, watched the flames catch, felt the familiar heat begin to rise. The flour bin was full. She had checked it last night. The eggs were fresh, gathered yesterday from the hen house behind the barn. The butter sat in its crock in the cool corner of the larder, soft enough to work, but not melting. She was measuring flour when the back door opened. Emmett stood on the threshold, his hat in his hands, his face eager and uncertain in equal measure. He had grown in the past months, not taller, but broader, more confident. The nervous boy who had lingered after breakfast on that first morning was becoming a man. "Ma'am, you said I could watch today if you had time. I said you could help." Mercy gestured to the counter beside her. "Wash your hands first." Emmett crossed to the pump, scrubbed his hands until they were red, dried them on the towel hanging by the window. Then he stood at the counter, waiting. "Biscuits," Mercy said. "We'll start with biscuits." She showed him how to measure the flour not with a cup, but with his hands, feeling the weight of it, learning what enough looked like. She showed him how to cut the lard into the mixture, using his fingers to work it into crumbs the size of small peas. She showed him how to add the buttermilk slowly, stirring with a fork, knowing when to stop by the way the dough pulled together. "Not too much," she said. "Work it too hard, and the biscuits turn out tough. You want them light, tender." Emmett nodded. His hands moved carefully, mimicking hers, the dough forming under his palms. Like this. Mercy looked at the dough. It was shaggy, uneven. But it would do. "Good. Now we roll it out." The rolling pin was worn smooth from years of use, her mother's rolling pin, brought from St. Louis, in the bottom of her carpet bag. Mercy handed it to Emmett, watched him press and turn, the dough flattening into a rough circle. "How do you know when it's ready?" "You feel it." She pressed her finger into the edge of the dough. "See how it springs back? That means there's still life in it. If it just lies there flat, you've worked it too hard." Emmett pressed his own finger into the dough, watched it spring back. A grin spread across his face. "I felt it." "Good. Now we cut." She handed him the biscuit cutter, a tin ring with a wooden handle, another relic from her mother's kitchen. He pressed it into the dough, twisted, lifted. A perfect circle of dough came up with it. Set them on the pan, close together. They help each other rise. The biscuits went into the oven. The smell of baking filled the kitchen, butter and flour, and the particular warmth of bread becoming bread. Mercy started the bacon, the eggs, the coffee. Emmett watched everything, asking questions, absorbing answers. The back door opened again. Caleb stood in the doorway. His eyes moved from Mercy to Emmett to the biscuits visible through the oven's window. "Smells good." "Emmett made them." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Did he now?" "I helped." Emmett's voice cracked with pride. "She showed me how." Caleb crossed to the small table by the window, the table where he had begun taking his morning coffee, away from the noise of the dining hall, close to the warmth of the stove. A cup was already waiting for him, steam rising from the dark surface. "You knew I was coming," he said. "You come every morning." He sat, picked up the cup, took a sip. Mercy turned back to the stove. The bacon was crisping, the eggs waiting in their bowl. Behind her, she could hear Emmett opening the oven to check on his biscuits, could hear Caleb settling into his chair, could hear the ordinary sounds of a morning unfolding the way mornings were meant to unfold. The oven door closed. Emmett's voice rose in dismay. "They're burned! The tops are burned." Mercy crossed to look. The biscuits were indeed darker than they should have been, the edges brown, the tops approaching black. "Next time, check them sooner," she said. An oven can turn on you in a minute, but they're ruined. Mercy took one from the pan, broke it open. The inside was golden, fluffy, steaming with warmth. She handed half to Emmett, half to Caleb. Taste? Both men bit into the biscuit. Both men chewed. Caleb looked at Emmett. Not bad. Emmett's face split into a grin. Really? Really? Caleb took another bite. Better than my first attempt, and I never had anyone to teach me. Mercy turned back to the stove. The morning light streamed through the window, catching the flour dust floating in the air, turning it to gold. The bacon popped and sizzled. The coffee steamed in its pot. Behind her, Caleb and Emmett were talking about biscuits, about the day's work, about nothing in particular. She picked up a burned biscuit, bit into it. The outside was bitter, charred, but the inside was perfect, warm and soft, and exactly right. The biscuits were imperfect, but the morning was not. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes after a story like this one. Not silence, exactly. Something softer. The feeling of having sat with someone for a while, shared a pot of coffee, and now watching them walk back down the road toward home. Many of us have stood where Mercy stood on the outside of a closed door, holding something valuable that no one wanted to see. Some of us have been Caleb, too so certain of what we believe that we almost missed what was right in front of us. And perhaps a few of us have been the ones who passed by on the road, who could have stopped but didn't, and who still carry that small, quiet weight. These things don't need to be resolved. They don't need to be fixed or forgiven or understood. They are simply part of being human, the tender places we carry, the meals we remember, the people who fed us when we didn't know we were hungry. It's all right to let this story rest now. It's all right to let it sit with you, or to let it go. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.